Hello, everyone, and welcome to School of Speech, presented by Speech Therapy PD. I'm your host, Carolyn Dolby, and I am so glad you are tuning in today. Today's episode is called The Ideology of Good Languaging, refocusing the lens for the school-based SLP. We are honored to have Dr. Maria Rosa Brea-Spahn. Dr. Brea-Spahn is a Spanglish, I hope I said that right, yes, and English communicator. She is also a speech language pathologist and a university teacher scholar whose work has been centered on the intersection of multilingualism and disability. Her classroom and community collaborators focus on researching the impact of standardized linguistic ideologies and speech language practices, sustaining variability in languaging in the classroom, and co-envisioning a path for linguistic liberation through art. All right, everyone, I want everyone to settle in for an amazing episode with an amazing clinician. First, I do want to remind everyone that each episode of School of Speech is offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. And while we are settling in, I'm going to go with some disclosures. Dr. Brea-Spahn is a full-time employee of New York University. She is receiving an honorarium from speech therapy for her participation today with no financial disclosures. For me, I'm a salaried SLP for Portland Public Schools, and I'm also compensated for my graduate courses I teach, and I do receive compensation from Speech Therapy PD for hosting School of Speech. This is my dream job. Non-financial, I do consult for school districts across the nation to support the building of their dysphagia programs and staff training. I wanted to share that, but enough about me. Let's start with getting to know Maria Rosa. Hi, Maria Rosa. How are you?
Hola, nice to see you, Carolyn, and nice to see everyone in the space with us today.
Oh, I am so excited. I know we were talking before that this means a lot to me. This kind of hit me, and I'm so excited to have you. I think everyone is really interested, and I am really interested because I want to know your journey. Can you start us off with your journey and let us know how you got here?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good place to start. I think we all should start with our journeys because it's how we then end up positioned to do the work that we do. So, I came to speech language pathology, not really wanting speech language pathology because I didn't know what it was. I was born and raised in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic in the Caribbean. I immigrated with my family in my senior year of high school, and I didn't speak English when I first came to this country. So I was placed in an English as a new language, which is what we call it in New York, second language, which is what we called it in Florida, where my family and I immigrated to, classroom and pulled out for supportive services. And so I come to SLP already loving language, having been born and raised into my Dominican Espanol with a mother who speaks 4 or 5 languages and a father who spoke 2. So my family was multilingual in the Dominican Republic, and believe it or not, was also a family that had roots in other countries. Because a lot of the times we think of the person who comes from somewhere else as only being born and raised in that somewhere else. And yes, that's true for me, but I was a daughter of immigrants, or sort of descendant of immigrants from my grandparents, perspective. My grandfather on my maternal side was born in Brooklyn, New York, and married my grandmother, who was born in Naples, Italy. And so my mother obviously spoke Italian and English as a result. Also, she went to a bilingual school, among other languages that she also spoke and then taught. And then my father spoke Espanol because he was born and raised there. But during the dictatorship that Trujillo, governed over the Dominican Republic for over 30 years, his family was able to send him abroad to study in Italy. And so his political science master's is from a very prestigious university in Florence. And just it's important to know that because a lot of the times also we have a certain vision of who the immigrant is. And I think we're a very heterogeneous group. But that's not to say that once I came into the US, I didn't become the other and also didn't experience what would be the beginning ripples of the work that I do now, right? And so I personally have experienced what it's like being the other in terms of language or being quote unquote different, as well as being treated that I'm not smart enough as a result of how I sounded or could not sound at the time. SLP doesn't come into my realm of awareness until my mother mentions it when I start my associate in arts at the community college, and I am forbidden by the college to take Spanish as my foreign language because I was too proficient in it, and there wasn't the choice at the time to take an exam to test out of it. And I was instead asked to choose a different language. And I knew I didn't like French because I had to try to learn it in the Dominican Republic, and it is not my language. Italian is a different thing. I do love Italian. I don't speak it, but I'm learning it with Duolingo now. I ended up choosing American Sign Language, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the being able to use my body to communicate in another tongue, right? Like we use our mouths a lot, but and I kid around a lot of the times with my students when I say I've lost control of the lower part of my face since I've been assimilated into what it's like to language, and I do use language, and we'll get into it in a moment, as a verb, language in English, because in the United States, nobody knew when I wrinkled my nose, that meant what in the Dominican Republic, or when I pointed with my lips in a direction, that meant look over there, right? Which is less polite than pointing with my finger, but also less of, like more concealed. So you could do these things, as part of like cultural signs and symbols, what we call semiotics, in linguistics. So I ended up languaging with my hands for ASL 1 and ASL 2, and then taking deaf culture and finger spelling, which I ended up teaching my sister so that we could communicate without everybody knowing what we were saying through finger spellings. And so I really thought, I'm like, okay, well, this is something that I want to do, but the only avenue for that at the time that I knew of was to become an interpreter, and that was not what I wanted. And so it was my mom who said, like, talk to your college counselor about this career called speech language pathology. And I did, and I liked what I read. And so I started in it. And of course, I began a journey of being a clinician. I did a thesis. Of course, my Spanish also was very prominently featured in everything that I do because it's part of me, right? And so I think that's the theme. What is interesting is I didn't have full. And I think actually, Carolyn, like actually saying this in front of the audience now is what allows me to see like that I'm connecting the dots in my life. Like I have never talked about my journey in this way per se.
Oh,
yeah. So like having this
loved
opportunity.
it.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't until I graduated, I worked as an SLP in a school in reading and literacy, had my own classroom for children with language learning disabilities at the time when we had those in Florida, self-contained. I loved the kids there. That I decided, I'm like, I need to know more. Like, I love learning. I am a self-proclaimed nerd maid.
Wait, you said nerd maid?
Maid. Yeah, nerd
Okay.
maid. Okay, so like that's actually my daughter Leah's word. She made me a little drawing when she was very little. It used to be on my door. It was a mermaid who's a nerd. And I actually have a best friend, and we call each other the nerd maids, but
Cute.
the Luca, yeah. At any point, SLP basically came into my life through my mother, but the prominence of my bilingualism and my conception of difference, and sort of my criticality around this, so sort of my questioning of like, how am I defining myself and how am I defining my communities? And what responsibility do I have as a scholar in a university who is preparing a set of new generations who are going to be working with these communities who need us, and that was in parallel developing at the same time as me having these conversations with families who were in tears telling me a speech language therapist or a pediatrician or a teacher told me to stop speaking Spanish because it would confuse my child who is non-speaking, who is disabled in any ways. And so those myths are still out there. I actually just met an undergraduate student today who told me that her family was told that 20 years ago. And her mother banned Spanish in the house. And so to know that these things were so like bubbly inside of me, then comes the bigger critical turn happened when I moved to New York. So I grew up in Florida. I had a job in Tennessee, went back to Florida to teach in my alma mater. And then the position at NYU opened up, which was to begin and to develop what we call the bilingual extension certificate here. So I was recruited to be the very first director of that track. And, you know, again, like you look at journeys, right? We talk about journeys and stories. I'm an immigrant who didn't speak the language. To be recruited by a university, of course, like I came here and I gave my little spiel, right? Like it wasn't like just like they came and they picked me out of a hat. But to have that idea of like you arrive here, right? And so there's a lot of fantasy that can go into that, sort of like we can romanticize the notion of like we have arrived, and as an immigrant, like we like to be the exception, or stories like to position us as the exceptions. But sometimes what is more interesting is like what happens once we get to a place like that, which is the complete unsettling of every belief that I had about bilingualism, in the sense that I was already in that route. Bilingualism for me was not so much about proficiency, but much more about what is the need for the languages that we have? What are the purposes for those languages that we use? How do we create purposes? And then what are the rituals in which we use them? Because that's what creates the motivation to maintain them, to reclaim them, to make them part of who we are, right? And again, all of that comes from my work with families too. It's not because I'm imagining things, but also from my own positionality as a multilingual human being who's evolved. And so when I came to New York, I know it's a long story. I will tell you,
I love it.
Spanish speaking people, or at least I don't want to like generalize, but in my family, we tell stories. My grandma would always tell me stories. My mom would always tell me stories at night. So before bedtime, it wasn't like reading books. So when I come to New York, which I have felt was as big a turning point in my life, like a threshold moment as it was coming to the United States, because it was so different from anything I had experienced before. And I didn't know a soul here, right? So, I mean, I came with my family, but still, like, I didn't know anybody. So I end up attending a lecture my very first semester by Professora Ofelia Garcia. That is a name that, you know, everybody should know in the field of speech language pathology. I'm actually going to put it in.
Yeah, put it in the chat. So
Ofelia Garcia. Ofelia Garcia is an educational, I don't know how she positions it. She's in education linguistics, but she was, I'm going to call her this, even though I know she's not necessarily this, and she wouldn't necessarily claim that. She is like the mother of translanguaging, okay? Like the person who made translanguaging mainstream. And when we talk about translanguaging, again, I already told you what my stance was about bilingualism. It wasn't about separating the languages. It wasn't about keeping two languages perfectly proficient. It was about, yes, you can Google her. And actually she was at CUNY. I don't know if she has an individual website, but she was the person who trained a lot of the people that I have read my entire life. And most of her students have become rock stars, you know, in the fields. Not like rock stars, like they play the guitar, but you know. But so Ofelia talked about the concept of translanguaging as a stance, as a sort of it's like a place that you move to, that's a framework, but also it's a way of teaching, right? But let's think about like that an individual who is using language, this is where we get into the concept of languaging, or language as a verb, right? That when we are using language in SLP, we learn a very specific definition of what language is. we objectify it, we can find the structure in it or the structures in it, we can manipulate it to teach it. And that's an important definition. None of the definitions that we learn are neither good nor bad. Okay, just like none of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, when we talk about belief systems, when we talk about ideas or ideologies or ideologies, if that's how you say it, nothing is either good or bad. Okay, it's whenever we adapt or we put them on that continuum of good or bad, that's when we need to really critically analyze ourselves, right? And so when we think about the definition of language that we have, it is kind of like a limited definition. We have this definition of it as a set of structures, as a way of using it, but we don't get into like multimodality much more until we are dealing with or centering people who have complex, quote unquote, complex communication needs, right? And I say that in quotes because everybody almost has a phone at this point. Everybody knows what an emoji is. Everybody, you see me moving my hands in this podcast. You know, if some of us are dancers, if some of us are smiling or making our eyebrows go, we language with much more than just this thing that we're doing with our mouths that makes a sound from our vocal box, right? Like our voice box. It's a lot more complex than that. If you are an artist or if you have dabbled in art, and I'm a photographer, like that's language for me too. It's a different way of languaging. It's a different way of observing, of making meaning. And so when Ophelia talked about translanguaging, that's how she viewed bilingualism. So there wasn't this need to kind of talk about bilinguals as either good or not good, fluent or not fluent, native or not native. Those binaries weren't there. You have a set of like sort of a treasure chest, or she calls it a pearl necklace, is how she calls it. Like you have different pearls in your necklace. And so, and that pearl can be like maybe an individual language, maybe for me, Dominican Español from Santo Domingo, right? And I'm very specific because Español is not just a homogenized tongue that everybody uses in Latin America, right? Or in Spain, like it's not just one way of using it. So I may have a little pearl that's that, but maybe another pearl is photography. And maybe there's two pearls that are kind of fused together and has like my drawings, because I like to draw to make sense. Sometimes I don't draw, I'm not going to assign myself as either good or not good in here, but my drawing is not as good as how I language in other ways. Let's put it that way. So relativize it. So the point is that when I heard Ophelia, it kind of made me pause and ask myself, I'm a very reflective person. So I asked myself, how have I defined bilinguals in my studies that I have done, that have been scholarship? And when I give a consent form as a scholar to a person who is bi-multilingual, that person is signing off their trust to participate in this space, to give me part of who they are, whether it's knowledge, attention, name, whatever it is that they're going to do with me, which is not unlike what they do with us in our therapy sessions, right? But they're giving me their time and their trust. How am I turning around to describe them when I publish this study? So it's a real oh, wait. Every piece of work I have published up until that point would start with children who are bi-multilingual, or children who, in this case, are English language learners, which, by the way, should we say, like every single human who's in here is an English language learner. Like, that's the reality of it. We're all learning English at this point in this country.
Sure.
So, if you're in this country and even in the world sometimes, right? And so the designation of English learner sometimes gets attached to a very specific population because it's programmatic at the school level or education department, language and policy. But in reality, we are all learners of this language that has been or is proposed to become the national language, official national language of the United States. I know, we can get into that.
I know.
We can get into that because that's a whole other idea too there. But the notion of every single study that I would publish would start with children who are English learners are falling behind in reading and writing, because that's what the literature said. That's what the statistics said. And I always thought, or struggle with academic content. And I always thought I would read, my own writing was like that, okay? And I would read it and I would think like, you feel very conflicted when you are part of an insider of that community too. And you think, well, I was learning when I first came to the United States, and I'm still learning. I consider learning to be something that never ends. Like the day that we die is the day that we end up learning. Like, and who knows what happens after we die, right? Like for those people who like to think about magical realism and other things. So, so you think about that, and sort of it made me at that moment commit to have a different stance, like a different way of describing my people and myself. I refuse to talk about my funds of knowledge and the funds of knowledge of the humans who language in different ways, multiple ways, every single human who's around me, as anything other than evolving, as anything other than I'm learning with them, as anything other as dynamic, right? And so that's where my definition of language began to it was like there was this little cocoon that started like rupturing or shaking. And so through Ophelia's, and she's like a grandma too, like she has like major like grandma energy when you meet her. Like she can be hard, like in terms of like her scholars, like very rigorous in terms of her scholarship and what she expects from all of us. But she's been my indirect mentor, even though we've only like crossed emails and seen each other twice. Okay? And I love her. Yep. I love her. Like she's the bilingual Latina mentor that I needed that I never had. Right. And so look at how many years later I came to New York in 2017. I had been in the academy since 2009. And I had no role model who looked like me, who sounded like me, who had similar experiences to me. Right. And so that also impacts the type of scholarship that we put out as individuals who are minoritized. Like it doesn't matter that you're minoritized, just because you are, it doesn't make you have a crown on your head that says you're not biased. Right? We all have those places of growth that we need to have. So that's a little bit about sort of like how I got to where I am. I know we didn't get to quite defining languaging yet, but I'm sure that you have that kind of like.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get there. No, but it just,
yeah.
I mean, even just listening to you, just what you've shared, like, thank you for taking this space and sharing with us. That was just authentic, and your journey. You are, I did, like I was saying before we got started, reading your article in Perspectives changed me. And I know we're going to get into that too. So Maria Rosa wrote a wonderful article for Perspectives just in April, and talking about languaging and children's books, and it just gave me pause. And that was kind of the first time I heard languaging. And so let's talk about languaging. I know you kind of,
I kind of like,
yeah. Yeah. So you've used it, but now tell us about languaging.
Yeah. So I mean, the paper does a really good job, by the way. And
I'm going to put
and if you have trouble accessing it for whatever the reason, pop me a little note and I'm happy to send it to you. Because sometimes you have to belong to Perspectives to be able to access it, right?
Gotcha.
It's not open source, so.
So those listening, I added the link into the chat. But Maria Rosa, would you be okay if listeners emailed you for that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to I don't know if this is violating any laws, but I'm happy to going ahead, and I have so I use this paper in my class, and I have it as part of a website that I build for my students. So I'm happy to just pop the PDF as a link.
You know what I did? I did not. Thank you. Somebody just said I do this. Sorry, I added it, but I didn't do it to everyone. Thank you forever. Whoever raised your hand, just I know that's what you were asking, and there you go. Did you guys get it? Hopefully that now went to everybody.
Oh, you sent it to me.
I sent it to you instead of everybody listening. So I think.
Okay, let's see how messy this gets. Try to see if this works for you. It's super long. If you click on it, does it work?
I clicked on it. It did not work. It says this
Okay.
site can't be reached.
All right. So,
We'll try again.
we'll figure it out, but email me. And
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah. Okay.
there's my email.
Oh, okay. So I want to, oh, you know what? I'm going, you also just did that to me. Can you,
Oh,
you know what? But you know what? I can now put it in for everybody, I think.
okay. Oh, I see. I didn't put in well, it didn't
Yeah.
work for you anyways.
I know. I did the same thing.
We're silly here.
I know. I was just I was just lamenting about
Yeah.
being old.
It's not being old.
It's
Also,
just
I mean, I don't know. For me, it's
there.
actually late. I'm usually asleep at 8:30.
Okay,
So
I'm gonna,
it's amazing I'm awake.
hey, Stephanie, Kittos, if you're out there, did you get that? Did you see that next one? Sorry, I'm calling out one of our listeners. And hi, I'd like to meet you, Stephanie. Sorry about that. Okay, we got it. Everybody got it. Okay,
right.
sorry, y'all. All right, let's get into
Yeah,
it.
and feel free to email me and I'll send you the piece. The paper itself is, I need to remember the title. It's called Strangeness in the Looking Glass, a tutorial for interrogating ideologies of good, in quotation marks, languaging in children's picture books. And it comes, the idea of strangeness in a looking glass comes from a famous writer, Gwendolyn Brooks, who was the very first Black woman to earn the, I forget, like one of the big prizes of literature at this point. I can't remember, but she had a little poem that read, "Do you ever look in the looking glass and see a stranger there? A child you know and do not know, wearing what you wear?" And so it kind of suggested to me that we sometimes use words or have ideas about people, and that those ideas, once imposed, can also be like masks that we put on ourselves so that we don't recognize ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about languaging. So I started briefly talking at the beginning that the definition of language that we have all learned in SLP is a borrowing from like linguistics a lot of the times. I mean, we use the definition of language that maybe Chomsky let us have, which suggested that we have a predisposition to using this very complex system that allows us to send a message from me to you and for you to understand it and give me some feedback, right? Like that idea of communication is also part of languaging. And then that language itself has several domains that we sometimes like to analyze through various means and also to teach. And literacy sometimes is also seen as part of language. Sometimes we like to separate it and give it to other people. But to me, it's all language is language. So that's sort of the main definition that we have of language. Anytime we have language that, that is different from those definitions, then sometimes we can categorize it as either a difference, right? If it's something that is as a result of a person being exposed to, in this case, we're centering English because that's the language that mostly our profession centers in the United States, then it would be a difference. If it's something that doesn't quite fit under difference, then we know that it falls under what we would call, and I use the word disability, I don't use the word disorder. So disability, right? And so that is the main definition that we have. What if I told you that there is a more expansive definition out there that I didn't even know existed until the last few years, or that I knew, but that those knowledges about that were the knowledge that I had, the wisdom that I had about other ways of looking at language were in my body and I didn't even know that they were there, right? Because remember how I started with my journey at the beginning, and even like going into ASL, which is a language that uses, other parts of our body that may not be this thing that we're producing and being perceived, right? Called speech. And so the notion of languaging is that language, when we are using language, we are using it dynamically, meaning it's going to change the meaning that we build with another human being is going to change depending on the context and depending on the people who are communicating or languaging together. The notion of languaging is also that language is part of the body. is not just this thing that we produce with our vocal cords that is produced via spoken. So it kind of disrupts a little bit how a lot of the capital D deaf individuals in the deaf community feel that there's this preponderance, and actually we do live in a world that centers autism, or the ability to perceive through our ears, through hearing. It disrupts that in the sense that every human being is also languaging through multiple modalities. Again, think about your phone, think about text, think about emojis, think about abbreviations, think about GIFs or GIFs, however you call them. Okay, all of those are ways of languaging too. And in addition to that, it disrupts the idea that it has to be good or bad. In other words, a concept of languaging means that you have a repertoire to be able to communicate that is at your disposal, that is yours and yours alone, uniquely yours, okay? And so you bring that to every exchange that you may have, both with people, but also with a non-human world. And so you think about the book More Than Words, for example, that is one of the books that is analyzed in the article, that we analyzed in the article, that is about a non-speaking autistic boy. And I do use, you know, identity first language in this case. And the little boy is talking about touching the grass, twirling and hugging trees as part of his languaging repertoire. And that may not have meaning to us, you know, it may hold no meaning that is of relevance to our daily communication or daily languaging repertoire. But it held meaning for him and his mother, who is also featured in the book, who actually wrote the book about her son, right? And who's also autistic. So, again, the idea is that then when we talk about language, it's not this thing that is outside of us that then we analyze only. It's not this thing that only comes from another country that then we can call national languages and nations, you know, nation state tongues. It's not just that. It's not that those things are not there. It doesn't have to be this idealized thing that is standardized. So it really disrupts the notion that there is a standardized language, which actually linguists have refuted for ages, and SLPs have not yet caught on with that. We're still using the word SAE. We're still using or standardized American English. We're still using the word mainstream American English. It's the same thing that linguists will tell you there is no such thing. We even like, if you hang out with a person long enough, you end up catching their mannerisms in your own way of languaging.
Oh my gosh,
Doesn't
a light
that
bulb.
happen?
Oh, I love when this happens to me. Like when they say, I speak your language. We might both be speaking English, but oh my gosh, you gave me gooseflesh.
That's exactly it. But we have such a limited view. And so we don't even consider, sometimes we can lean into the idea of like language as identity. Like when we think about difference, like we can be a little bit flexible when it comes to that. But we consider people who use augmentative communication as people who have complex communication needs. Everybody's complex. Everybody has complex communication needs. I mean, I'm not taking that away from them, but a person with a speech generating device, that is another tool in their repertoire to language. Just like the human being who does not use any kind of device, uses eye gaze, uses their bodies and grunts. The human who is their paired communicative partner knows what those grunts mean. Knows when a person is moving, what it means. Have you ever taken care of a baby? It's the
I
same
was just
thing.
gonna say the different as a young mom, my daughter's now 31, but as a young, you knew the happy cry, sad cry, hungry cry.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So the languaging concept or construct is calling us in to like expand a little bit. It is a little bit abstract, but what it helps us do then is not create these categories of language difference, of disability, of accents. For example, under a languaging stance, you're not considering accents as something that only a few people have. Everybody has an accent.
Yes.
Okay. And it doesn't position people on a hierarchy. And so in the paper, there is one drawing I tried. Okay, so like the notion of languaging also comes bearing with it, a moment of like, take a deep breath and then exhale, is what are my beliefs about good language? What does good language mean to me? And I have in the paper we have, because it was a paper written with my students and a couple of colleagues, we have a figure that shows that there's different ways of languaging that are always present in the world, but they go through like this little like funnel or filter. And that filter serves as to standardize. And we all have an idea of what the standardized communicator is what we're doing right now. And in our sense, like I will say, even in my case, I'm bringing it up because I'm talking academic, right? Lingo here. And so even that is more standardized because that's what we learn in school is the right thing to sound smart. And again, any notion that you have about what good language is also is a notion of who the competent languager or language user, if you want to use user because you don't like the at the end, is. You are making judgments the minute. So one version of this would be the preferred modality is spoken because that's what the world has been built. The preferred modality is one that can listen and understand, right? Read and write too, in a lot of cases. And so that discards a whole bunch of other modalities and ways of languaging that are not considered then the dogma. That becomes the dogma. The dogma is like, this is what we're going to believe. And again, it by itself is not a bad thing. We are called in to inspect ourselves when we decide that is the good thing and everything else is not good, right? When the hierarchy and the binary, you think about going to school. If any of us, I was brought up Catholic, so there's isn't a more, binary religion than Catholicism, where it tells you like what is right and what is not right. So this notion of morality, that language also carries that. Our visions of language also carry like who is right, who is not, who languages well, who doesn't language. Our entire profession is built upon that. And so the reasoning behind this calling into like, can we imagine something different? Is a way to also disrupt this idea that we all have to be placed into little categories. So the article, and then I'll finish, says that when we use the concept of languaging, then we're able to provide examples of children who are non-speaking and like how their languaging is depicted or not in children's books. Children who are learning English as a quote unquote new language, okay, and how their initial mother tongue was positioned and or considered to be less than, and how there's this push for assimilation into the English and how that's viewed, especially when you're not code switching, when you're not using a Spanglish, right? That's as the way that is pure, the way that you are the more competent communicator. That's two examples there alone. You can bring in deafness, you can bring in any other form of languaging that involves a stigma in society. And under the concept of languaging, you're like disrupting all of that. Nobody language, there's no, it just came out actually today. I paused because it made me laugh because this is something that I had a very dear friend who passed away in 2023, Dr. Jonathan Henner. He died of cancer, very young. Brilliant human, deaf scholar who wrote a beautiful paper called Crypt Linguistics. It was a manifesto, and who used to say, your languaging, I'm going to butcher it, is never wrong. Your languaging is the story of your life. Don't let anybody tell you that it's wrong. And so essentially that idea of languaging is the disruption of what are the ways in which we have standardized our notions of language into little boxes.
So it's really reframing our concept of languaging versus language, and that it's not binary. It's not whether it's good or it's bad. It's I love it when you said it's dynamic. It's their whole everything, and
Yes.
the
And
story of them.
and in the paper, there's the figure that I talk about also kind of has like the good language or the standardized preferred good languaging also going through
Hmm.
like this conveyor belt and then being placed into little boxes. And the little boxes are labeled. So like one of the boxes is orality. So spoken language being positioned as the preferred modality, what John actually Henner used to call modality chauvinism, because he said
Oh.
spoken modality is like chauvinist in comparison to the non-spoken ways of being, right?
Mhm.
It also has the standard language myth, this idea that there is a standard language, right? And it also has the myth of the non-accent, because the person who reportedly doesn't have an accent is the person who is the native speaker. So there are these boxes that we pick up and we take up as our own, and we may define ourselves. I've heard so many people say my Spanish is not good enough for me to call myself a bilingual. My my English is my writing is not good enough. It always gets picked at, right? My reading is not good enough to not to like pick a wound with Carolyn, right? But like
Yeah.
being called out to
Yeah.
for not reading a word. And so the other piece about this that I'm really interested in now is if in fact, or not if, when we bring language into our bodies and we reclaim that as part of who we are, meaning we use it all the time, right? In different ways. Um, where is the language wound and how do we heal it? Because it's also
Hmm.
generational. Like our families who come to me and tell me, I banned Spanish in my home because I didn't want to confuse my child. There's
And
a
I,
wound there.
yeah,
There's pain there.
and
And so
language, it's your culture, and you're saying,
it's everything. It's who you are.
and you're boiling it down to that's bad
Mhm.
versus embracing. And I think the point is that being speech language pathologists, and we are diagnostic clinicians, diagnosing language, that we have to be careful that we are not demonizing, shaming that something is wrong. Yes, we want to make sure that everybody is a efficient and adequate communicator.
According to themselves,
Yes,
according
to
to
their
what they
languaging.
seek. And I think that's particularly crucial when we talk then about children, because children do
Hmm.
not have the autonomy to tell us how they want to language. We tell
Mm.
children how they need to language. We tell children that they don't know enough. We assume, even though when I started my photography, my
Hmm.
daughter was teeny tiny, and it became what it became, this journey for me to like parallel play with her, observe how she was taking in the world, how she was labeling even without the words. I have it's like memorializing moments
Hmm.
by her, watching her walk through a field of grass and the grass tickle her knees and her laughing. I remember how she laughed. I remember what she was wearing. I remember how she smelled
Mm.
throughout like an entire long period of time of us growing together. And so if that is the case, and that's what language does for us too, if we take a language away from a person or a way of languaging from a person, and again, this is a child who is teaching me how to
Mm.
look at the world. Okay. What is the way in which we can become humble enough with the humans with whom we are partnering, because it is a partnership, it's a co-learning space when we become therapists. It is
Hmm.
not, pathology isn't our name. We have to contend with that. We're very honest about what we do, right?
Hmm.
We pathologize. We identify what the pathologies are to cure them. We're rooted in the medical model, right?
Yes.
But in that space, like, how can we become humble to what the human next to us, regardless of age? It's like the child-led, person-led, right?
Hmm.
Play-based, how do we become playmates as opposed to like being the people who are like, no, we're gonna do it this way because, and I get it, like we have goals, we have insurances, we have it's not just idealizing. I know that there are those moments when you do have to follow quote unquote rules and establish hierarchies, but then Elfrida Garcia used to always say, where are the cracks in the system? And how do you work within the cracks?
Right.
They're
How do we make
always
it
there.
better?
Yeah, well, they're always there.
And really, I think what I'm hearing, I hope I'm hearing this right, is languaging is really what we're all striving for, which is child strengths.
Yeah, well, it is our strengths too. Because like,
And
how hard are you on the way that you language?
say that again.
How hard are you on on describing your own language?
Oh, I'm a big critic. I know I always get embarrassed. I'm hosting a podcast and I stumble over my words.
Yeah.
I told you the story about what happened to me in fourth grade. I moved from Australia and I was reading out loud and I had an Australian accent and my teacher did not like it and the word was there. I'll never forget it. Say it again. Say it again because she did not I was speaking English, but I wasn't speaking her English. And from that moment on, I refused to read out loud, and I'm still triggered from it because I know I'm like if I'm just talking, I'm usually better. But like the beginning of the podcast, I'm reading like your bio, and I will stumble every single time. And
It's okay.
but I'm like I'm better than that. But
Okay,
that's
but
part.
why do you have to be
I
better than
know.
that? Did
Yes,
we understand you? Like, this is the
yes,
thing. It's like we make meaning together, and meaning is never linear and it is never clean and
yeah,
pure. It is messy. Languaging
yes.
is supposed to be messy. Why are we so scared to be uncomfortable and to not understand? I've
I
never,
love this.
as a person who came from another country, who didn't understand at first, it's hard. Yes, it's hard. It's hard. And you don't want people, like, I always get very offended when people think of me as not smart, right?
Sure, yeah, because
Of
right, you're not
course.
speaking.
But there's something about the struggle of a shared moment and our being able to like arrive at the other side, whatever that other side may be, whatever the threshold is that we're crossing together, that is so magical when we can do it with patience and empathy and compassion. And just understand that we're going to have miscommunications. We're human beings. Like, we can be judgmental
Yeah.
of monkeys when they're communicating. Why, like, why not extend them some compassion and be marvel at the fact that whales communicate, that, like, even what are they called? What are they called? The little things that oh my God, I can't
Are you
remember
saying
that.
jellyfish?
Jellyfish. Yeah, see, you got it. You got it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, jellyfish. That was languaging with my hands. So like even jellyfish communicate with each other. Trees communicate with one another. We don't see it. We can't, so it's the belief in something that is much greater than that. But, let's bring this down to like therapy because I'm
Okay,
thinking
yeah.
of time. Yeah. So the real the languaging concept was introduced in this paper. I have been talking about it and writing about it for a few years already. But the important thing to take away from this paper is that anytime we choose any kind of artifact, and when I say artifact, I mean a children's book, I mean a handout that you're going to give to families, I mean a website that you're giving as a tool for people to learn from, even to other SLPs, like if you're doing like an in-service. I invite you to come into it kind of like asking some questions about what is there. And there is a little tool that we included in the paper that has a number of what we call dimensions to ask, and sort of like things that we can ask about it, like the context. What is the predominant definition of language that is centered in this particular children's book, for example? What are the ways in which language hierarchies are enacted through the theme, the text, the illustrations? What are beliefs or stereotypes about the relationship between language and belonging, or languaging and belonging, that are perpetuated in the theme or topic? And then I give you other examples there with like fill in the blank prompts that you can use. And then how do the theme, the text, and if there's pictures of people, invite people to imagine themselves and their language use. Because the thing is that a lot of the times we choose books that have minoritized people, if they're not banned in our states, and we can use them. But we don't look at what the ideas about how people use communication or language are, and what the human beings were perceiving those ideas are. So I know Carolyn, like, there was a quote in it about that came actually from a deaf scholar about if you have a book with depicting deaf children as children who are lacking in some way. I'm paraphrasing. And you have a hearing child reviewing that book or being read that book or observing that that child is going to make a construction about deaf people or children from a certain perspective, right? Positioning them as somebody who's lacking. But also the deaf child reading through that book is going to see themselves as also lacking. And so what are the ways in which we can be more curious about the materials that we're choosing, especially about the ideas of language? And so in this paper, we chose 3 books. One that's called Areli the Dreamer, which is about a DACA recipient who moves to this country and ends up deciding that she needs to relay the message through it. It's a real life story. Is that she had to learn English, and that when she learns English, she's like any other girl in New York, and she forgot the mountains in Mexico. So kind of alluding to what Antonia Darder, who's a linguist and wrote this beautiful paper about linguistic genocide. And it's beautiful because it's painful to read it, but it's beautiful also because it shows us that language also carries memory. And that if we take language away from people, or if we ourselves give up our way of languaging, then we are ourselves belonging to a culture of forgetting, which I think is like such a powerful idea. So that was the first book. The second book is called Gibberish. And it's also written in a way of sort of a child who's attending school, who's like speaking a language that is very different. But the cool thing about this book is everything is written in sort of not just text, but also like emojis or little drawings. And then there's also the idea of like partnering with a friend and then sort of having this special language that you and your friend understand. And so the notion of that when we are in relationship with each other, we're also building meaning, that it doesn't matter how perfect or imperfect our languaging is. Yeah. And then the last one, which is probably my favorite, is More Than Words, which is a book written by an autistic mother about her autistic son, who uses a speech generating device. And she uses it too, just to show that she belongs in that space too. So sort of normalizing languaging through a device, a tablet, but also centers this idea, normalizes, for lack of a better word, this idea that you language with the non-human world too, that there are ways of expressing yourself through twirling, through routines, through holding a tree, that is beautiful. And that book also kind of brings in the first person narrative of the child with autism or autistic child, neurodivergent autistic child, into the narrative too. So the purpose of the paper was not only to invite us to think about languaging in a more expansive way, but also to think about these books that sometimes we may use, or tools, whatever artifacts that we may use, and sort of find a way to like ask them questions, right? Like through ourselves, obviously. And then also think about what are the ways in which that book can be used in conversation with children. So like we also have a little script at the end.
It's fabulous. It really opened my eyes and made me think about how powerful we are when we are working with in the schools. We're all school-based. Most of us here for School of Speech, we're school-based clinicians, and so we are working with children, and how powerful we have, the power that we have, and we have to be better when we are choosing children's books. Not only, oh, this is one is depicting a child of another culture, but right. Did you really read it through? How is it really portraying? What is it really saying? That's what I got.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
from your article about, whoa, it's more than just, oh, yeah, I'm gonna be so culturally responsive and I'm gonna read this book. And to really understand what the message you are
And
actually saying.
especially about language, not to like
Yes.
interrupt, but I
No, yeah.
overlap always. It's my Italian
I
and my
love it. Bring
Spanish.
it.
It's especially what is the message about language? Like
Mm-hmm.
we think about if you give a handout to families about vocabulary, and in the handout about vocabulary, this goes back to the other paper that I wrote in 2023, but it says that by age whatever, children are supposed to have 60,000 words in their vocabulary. Okay. First, have you ever wondered where that quote comes from? What is the research? Who was centered in the research? And does it apply to everybody? And what words? Did it count bilingual words? Okay. So there's a lot that we assume. And I myself, I'm in the position, I'm a good girl. Okay. I was raised as a Latina, I'm the firstborn in my household. Like I was expected to follow the rules. And so following the rules also meant like whatever people tell me, I take face value if it's told through an evidence-based source, like an article, or by a human who is older than me or has more status than me. Like we have the usted in Spanish for a reason, right? Which is the pronoun like to denote like respect to the human. But the reality of it is that it's not that we are being disrespectful, it's the questioning stance or the critical stance, the naming what is there, the making it, and then sort of that tapping into your body. Like, what do you know? Like, do you really feel like, did you learn 60,000 words by the time you were that age? Did you have them just in one language or several languages? How were you languaging outside of just words? And like, what words counted and what words didn't count for you? Like, there's tons of wisdom in who we are and in our backgrounds too. And then what have we learned in classes? And then what are different ways of reframing and what are other disciplines talking about when it comes to vocab? Like, that's what I'm saying as far as like keeping the criticality going, which is crucial in this moment we are existing, where truths can be changed.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So what can we do? What can we do going forward, starting now?
So I would say definitely the little tool in the article might help. And also give me feedback once you use it. Like, it's too complex, it's not too complex. The other thing is like to have these forums where you're engaging as a group or dialoguing through, like maybe even choosing a book and going through it and seeing what you see, what are you noticing, what are ways in which we can use this in a therapy session, or what are ways in which we can disrupt this idea with kids. It's very complex, it's very abstract. Do we not use this book, or do we use this book that is really problematic, but like how do we work around it? I think conversations or dialogue as a community of co-learners are crucial for our field to move forward. We don't talk to each other enough. There's so much brilliance in our field, and we live in our little silos. So that's one thing. And I think the second thing is trust your instinct to question. Don't assume. And try to be flexible and see how you're languaging every day yourself. See how you can impose that compassionate lens onto yourselves.
Yeah. So I think it is pretty funny when we think about that we all have our masters of speech language pathology. We are our masters in communication and communication disorders. And yet in our job, how much are we really talking to each other? That is sort of like a dichotomy right there, right? And we know the power of language. We know the power of communicating. And I think you're just kind of like you said, like your article reframing the having us look through the lens of it's not only what we say, how we say it, but how we view how others say and what they say.
Right.
Yeah, it's more, yeah, it's just it's bigger.
And it's always like, do you ever go to a museum and you're looking at the paintings that are there? People had an intention in creating the painting itself. You can have a tour guide tell you what the intention might have been according to something that's been written, but you could also make your own assumption and converse with the painting itself to see what it evokes in you.
What
It is
emotion? Yes.
exactly the same with language. Paintings are language too.
Right. Art is culture, and honoring art. Yes, yes. And I love that you're a photographer. Yeah, I love that. I think, just being clinicians, we are artists. Maybe I can't draw and I can't sing and I can't take a picture. But I feel, we all have our gifts, you
You're
know.
a podcaster.
I know. Okay. I'm still kind of blown away that I'm doing this because I just love it. But yeah, and that is part of my languaging because it really has become a part of my identity. I just absolutely, I learn. I'm learning more every week I do this. I grow and I am better. I'm a better clinician from what um, even though I specialize in feeding and swallowing, y'all.
Which is another language.
It absolutely
See, it's part
is.
of your other languaging
Yeah.
repertoire as well.
And I'm able to, just learn from everybody. And I just think it is important that, as speech pathologists, that we communicate, not only with, in our little silo, but with each other, because we do have so much to learn from each other. And I know we're getting, to the end, and I can't believe it. I just love it. And I was been so excited to have you on, and I'm so glad you're here. I love the term languaging. Thank you so much for explaining, that it is dynamic. It's the whole student. And y'all definitely grab her article. She means it. She gave us her, email. You know what? I'm going to read it out loud for anyone that is just listening. It is mrb17 at nyu.edu. Wonderful, wonderful. I thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, thank you. I know that I feel like we're better, just from listening to you, knowing your journey. As we say, when we know better, we do better. And really thinking about before we just grab something and do something, make sure that its intent is what we intended, and to make sure that we are honoring everyone's languaging. Go out and language, everyone.
And those are the authors of the paper too. There's a
Oh,
few more
thank you.
after that, but I wasn't sure if.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, I can't believe we do have to say goodbye. I want to say thank you. I know.
Send your questions to, like, if you have questions or comments that you didn't get to post.
Yeah,
please
if
send
anybody
them.
has any questions, email, Maria Rosa. Honestly, she is here. She wants to interact. I love it. And I hope to see everybody and hear everybody next time. But all right, guys, I have to say goodbye. All right. Bye, everyone. Bye. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Maria Rosa, thank you so much. We're going to sign off now. Love it. Bye. Thank you, everybody.